following is a presentation of Learfield IMG College. From the Georgia Southern Sports Network, powered by Learfield IMG College.
Wings up, Eagle Nation! Touchdown, Georgia Southern!
This is Inside Eagle Nation, your all-access look into Eagle athletics.
Taking a look through all the other action in Georgia Southern athletics this past week, a lot of road action, a lot of teams hitting the old I-16 out of town.
Getting on the steel horse and taking us to parts north, south, west, wherever. Can't really go too much farther east.
Now let's return to the Learfield IMG College studios. Here are your hosts, Colin Lacy and Danny Reed.
That's a fact, Jack.
Welcome into another edition of Inside Eagle Nation, your all-access weekly look inside Georgia Southern Athletics, official podcast for Georgia Southern Athletics as well. A couple more taglines we could throw at you, but we won't. Colin Lacy alongside the voice of the Eagles, Danny Reed, a different edition of Inside Eagle Nation this week. We are going to open it up to you. As always, you can send your questions in on Facebook Live. You can tweet us at GS Sports Network. You can email us. A new feature we've added this summer.
We do the email now.
Yeah, welcome to the 20th century. GSSN, Georgia Southern Sports Network, GSSNbooth@gmail.com. This week, we're going to be going through our favorite memories, our favorite stories, favorite thoughts, I guess, of Georgia Southern athletics over the last however long. We've already got a couple of entries. But
we have to undo the bow and take the wrapping paper off get to those.
You can't just dive right into it. But we start with news and notes this week in Georgia Southern athletics. Not a whole lot this past week coming out on the Twitterverse and on gseagles.com. But a couple of congratulations to send out. I think you actually retweeted it that caught my attention of it. Rutledge in the CFL.
Yeah, he had his first career interception over the weekend.
Former Georgia Southern footballer, now up in the Canadian Football League, following in the footsteps of Tracy Ham, other greats.
Talked to Tracy earlier today for the 40-year project we've been working on.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But also a congratulations going out to Ryan Langen, former long snapper for Georgia Southern football, and had kind of lost track of him, but then come to find out he was a USFL champion.
Yes, he was.
Josh Moon on the other side of it as well. A couple of Georgia Southern Eagles squaring it up in the USFL championship.
Yeah, Birmingham beat Philadelphia, and the championship game was played at Fawcett Stadium in Canton, home of the Hall of Fame. Langen was teammates with former Coastal running back C.J. Marable. Both of them had gotten their NFL shots. And I think that the USFL may have found something by going back to this kind of format, because when they were back in their halcyon days back in the 80s, the reason why they lost their momentum is because they tried to go to the fall and they wanted to go head-to-head with the NFL. It didn't end up working out, but with what they just accomplished, getting through a full season, not being derailed by COVID or lack of funds or things of that nature, I think if they can stick with this format, they're going to have a chance to at least create their own space in the world of professional football. They're never going to unseat the NFL, and that's not the idea. And for all of these leagues that we have seen over the number of years, you feel bad for the AAF, but that just couldn't pan out. The second iteration of the XFL got wiped away because of COVID, but that's going to be coming back next year. You've got a number of other things on the table, but I think that the USFL has some staying power because they did make it through a full season, and it's really good for us to talk about Ryan Langen being part of a championship team.
So you've got a number of former Georgia Southern Eagles in professional football in a couple of different ways. The Canadian Football League, again with Rutledge, but then you've got Ryan Langen and Josh Moon in the USFL, just finishing up with the championship game that we talked about. But good to see former Eagles in pro football, and we talk about it a lot in professional baseball. Yeah, there's been a couple that have gotten to Major League Baseball where you see them on TV at night, but even the guys in minor league baseball, again, we're going to be doing a minor league update here in the next couple of weeks. We've talked about different basketball players that have gone off to play overseas and in different leagues. And I think it kind of gets overlooked that guys that are playing professional football rather, not necessarily in the NFL, but you're still a professional football player.
No, we would sit here all day long and talk about Matt Breida, Jerick McKinnon, Raymond Johnson, among many others. You got two of the best kickers in the league in opposing conferences in Tyler Bass and Younghoe Koo. But the fact that even though Ryan Langen's NFL shot, even though Josh Moon's NFL shot didn't necessarily pan out the way that they would have wanted to, the fact that the USFL had some success, and it means a little bit more to be able to play for a championship in year one. Yes, the USFL has been gone for a long time, but for Langen to be able to put his hands on a championship trophy, that's great for him individually, but it's also great for Georgia Southern. It's national exposure. You don't have to pay for that.
And you look at like the Younghoe Koo story. He started out in the AAF, and it's, only year in existence?
Yeah.
The second time around?
They didn't finish a full year, but he didn't miss a kick. He played at Turner Field, and apparently that helped out because he didn't miss a single kick playing for the Legends. He ends up catching on, and now the contract that he just got with the Falcons, he's potentially set up for the rest of his life.
Yeah. That story in and of itself, there needs to be a 30 for 30 or something like that coming out of it.
I wonder if we could get him on Inside Eagle Nation.
Oh, I'm sure we could.
I'm sure we could pull that off.
I'm sure we know a few people.
We're connected.
Yeah, we could do it. Again, this week, you get us your favorite memories of Georgia Southern athletics, whether you were at them, you watched them on TV, hopefully you listened to them on the radio if you weren't there. Get us your favorite memories. You can comment here on Facebook Live. You can tweet us at GS Sports Network or email us at gssnbooth@gmail.com. We've got a couple in the hopper, but something that you alluded to earlier that I don't know is necessarily public yet, but we're not necessarily breaking any news. There's a big project going on, and you're a big part of it, being the 40th anniversary of football here at Georgia Southern, and you got to do a couple of cool interviews today.
There is a bigger project as part of this whole unveiling that you'll find out in the fall, and this is a really big undertaking that the athletic department is getting involved with during the summer months, and you'll see a number of social media features. But getting a chance to talk, I mentioned Tracy Ham already, getting a chance to speak with him and speaking with a lot of the major players. I'm not talking about specifically Georgia Southern football players, but a lot of the people that were involved at the beginning of the program, the restart of the program back in 1981, and the people who have helped along the way, whether it's, I'm going to sound like Terry a little bit doing this, but whether it was a cheerleader, a trainer, an equipment manager, because everybody had their own perspective for a respective era of Georgia Southern football, whether you were there for the club days, the first two national championships, the changing of the guard from Irk Russell to Tim Stowers, Paul Johnson coming back, going 62-10 in 5 seasons, eventually watching Jason Foster win a Peyton after Adrian Peterson won the Peyton as a freshman, and then to watch Jeff Monken come back, go to 3 straight FCS semifinals, and then you make the move to the FBS in 2014, winning that conference championship in year one over ULM, going 3-1 in bowl appearances, winning 10 games in 2018. There's a lot of that, plus many more in the stories that we're going to be peeling back with all of these conversations that we're having with a number of people across Georgia Southern football and Georgia Southern athletics, and that's going to be part of something really special as we try to go as in-depth on the 40 years of Georgia Southern football as we can.
All right, to kick off this story episode, your favorite story that you got from today. You don't have to say who said it. It can be a tease.
Okay, I'll tell the last story that Tracy took, because I've talked with Tracy about this a lot. The 86 national championship game, Georgia Southern dominated Arkansas State 48-21 up in Tacoma. And over the course of the last couple of years on social media, we've publicized that Tracy's last snap as an Eagle was a 79-yard touchdown pass to Ricky Harris. If you've ever seen the video, he barely has the football long enough. He just throws this little floaty pass, and somehow Harris gets behind both levels, makes the catch, and then with Ricky's speed, despite knee surgery, he had enough speed to outrun everybody. That was Tracy's final play as an Eagle. He didn't come in, even though the offense retook the field over the final couple of minutes. The play before that, Georgia Southern was called for a false start. So apparently there was something that happened as they're going back to the huddle, and the game was decided at this point. Georgia Southern was going to win the game. So apparently there was some eye game going on between Ricky Harris and Tracy Ham about, you seeing, because he got off the line so quickly. He was the one that was called for the false start. And they realized nobody really covered him, so I thought, do this. So we're going to do this again. Looking at the sidelines, okay, let's do this again. Georgia Southern didn't need to score, but it turned out that this gave the Eagles one of their more iconic moments in the 1980s. Tracy gets the snap, pressure right in his face, pops one for Harris. He makes the catch. And, of course, Bill Edwards was on the call for Lewis Broadcasting that day because the Savannah TV crew actually traveled out to Tacoma. And a lot of people watching know this, some may not, but the color broadcaster that day was Bucky Wagner, who was someone else we spoke to.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, the first national championship, it was Mike Patrick that called it for ESPN. This was 85 against Furman. But the next year, local rights were maintained. Bill Edwards, the longtime sportscaster in Savannah, he now has a radio show in Savannah. But Bucky was the color guy that day, and one of the things we talked about with him earlier today was having to watch a game through the eyes of a broadcaster, not necessarily as an athletic director. So he talked about that a little bit, but really, really excited to be able to go even more in depth on some of the things that a lot of you watching already know because so many people are so passionate about Georgia Southern because these have been shared experiences from people that have been there since the beginning or stories that have been passed down from person to person, year to year. But these conversations have revealed stuff that a lot of people may not know. And that's the thing that's going to be fun to share, not just before the season, but as we get into the season, and hopefully a little bit longer than that, if Georgia Southern can get its way back to a successful 22 with Clay Helton coming in.
We've talked about it, and you and I have mentioned it to each other when we were recording Eagle Tales with Roger. There are things where you thought you had heard the whole story, and then when somebody new tells it, they add another layer to it that is like, well, I didn't know that part of it.
Roger telling us about Paulson Stadium, how it used to be trees, all trees.
Yep, Clarice.
Where Clarice and Bambi and Thumper and all that would be walking. I'm probably not Thumper, but anyway. And knowing that the practice fields at Eagle Creek, at one time, we heard this on Eagle Tales just last week, it was a par 3 golf course.
Yeah.
Had never occurred to me that that's the area that was purposed for 40-some years ago.
I like the story of the 18-inch crown on the field, and that all Tracy really needed to do was kind of get downhill, literally.
Yeah, don't think that Roger doesn't let Tracy hear about that most times he sees. Tracy was the first quarterback in college history to throw for 5,000 and run for 3,000. But Roger will tip his cap every time because a lot of happening at Paulson Stadium. He gets that downhill effect, that extra couple of degrees going on the 18-inch crown.
I don't know how many yards Roger Inman has on that field.
That'd be a fun one to try to figure out.
Mentioned earlier that we've got a couple of questions already coming in, or a couple of favorite moments. You can get your favorite moments in by commenting here on Facebook Live, tweet us at GS Sports Network, or email us to gssnbooth@gmail.com. Our buddy Moose saying, one of my favorite Georgia Southern moments is 2017 Georgia Southern versus Wake Forest basketball game. I was so happy when we won. I accidentally got so excited I randomly decided to jump off my couch and got carpet burn listening to you.
Well, I would hope that that's a random jump off the couch. That's not something regular, but hey, different strokes.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. That was a... You and I have talked about that week a lot because that was a crazy week for you and I. A lot of travel, a lot of miles, and not a whole lot of sleep those 4 days, 5 days.
It was worth it, though.
Oh, it was a blast.
It was absolutely worth it.
But that was a team that there's been a couple of times when we've done games, whether it be football or basketball, even baseball, that somebody that doesn't follow college athletics all that well would say, okay, this team should dominate. Like, if you look at it from the 100,000-foot view, Wake Forest should beat Georgia Southern. But that year, Georgia Southern was probably the better team. It was a rough patch for Wake Forest. They're starting to build their rise back up in the ACC. But that was a rough year for Wake Forest, and it was the beginning of the season. But there wasn't a whole lot of positive outlook for that team, and I hate to put it that way. And you go in thinking, okay, Wake Forest probably has the quote-unquote better athletes, but if you're Georgia Southern, you kind of went into that game expecting to win.
I remember when Mark Janak and I walked into the arena that night, because we actually walked across the street to BB&T Field where Wake Forest football plays, seeing if there was an open gate. Unfortunately, there wasn't. But we walked in that night and realized that Georgia Southern was a 10-point underdog. And we're looking at each other thinking, okay, just like you said, Wake's got the better players, but I think they won 14 games that season. Yeah. The feeling that we had going into Winston-Salem and the feeling around that team, and that squad ended up winning 21 games, that they were going to win the game. There wasn't a whole lot of doubt. It was Tukey Brown's junior year. You still had Ike Smith. You still had Mike Hughes, Jake Allsmiller, Monte Glenn among your cast of characters. And Wake Forest had built a 14-point lead, but Georgia Southern started to chip away. There was a Mike Hughes 3 with, I want to say, right around 2 or 3 minutes left that put Georgia Southern ahead for the first time. Ike Smith went over 1,000 points that game with his first basket. I think it was about 2 minutes in. And then it's Ike that tied the game with a 3 of his own with about a minute left. And after a blocked shot, Georgia Southern has the ball with a chance to win. I can remember this because it was on our end of the floor. We're on the far right side. Of course, we went there because the App State football game was the night before over in Boone, so it was about an hour, 90-minute drive to get to Winston-Salem, whatever it was. But Mike Hughes' far corner just heaves a 3, and Mike Hughes spent a whole career making shots like that, so as far as we were concerned, it was going to go in. It didn't fall, but Ike Smith got the offensive rebound, got fouled. I think there were 3 seconds left. He makes both free throws. Wake tries to inbound to half court, and they threw it to their 7'2 freshman, Darrell Moore, who just could not make the catch. It was right in front of us. Couldn't make the catch, dropped it near, just a little bit on that side of half court. Tukey ended up picking up the basketball, just threw it up in the air. And to think that was Georgia Southern's first Power 5 win since beating Virginia Tech a couple of years before to open the season. They hadn't won their first road game since, I want to say, 2006. And I remember the post-game talk with Mark Byington that night that it could not be the biggest moment of the year.
Yeah.
It was great. You love to beat an ACC team, but you had to make your hay in the Sun Belt Conference. And Georgia Southern ended up winning 21 games. They ended up getting to the semifinals of the tournament. That was the year that Georgia State got the Miracle 3 from Mitchell on the inbounds pass after the kickball with 1 second left. Georgia Southern almost come back from 18 down when DeMarcus Simons fouled out, but they ended up winning that game, and they went on to win the tournament. They beat UT Arlington that year. But to think back to that, and that's been almost 5 years already, to think back to how that season began and how Georgia Southern went into the game believing that they were going to win it, that was a cool night.
That was one that, again, you and I were together, but there have been times where Georgia Southern is down, and whether it's a in-between inning break or a media timeout, you and I will look at each other, and Jonathan, our board op, can attest to this, and we'll just look at each other and be like, all right, we're down, but we're fine.
Especially with baseball this year.
Yeah, no joke.
Especially with baseball this year.
But look at each other like, we're fine. And it was very weird to me to be saying that in an ACC arena against an ACC team when you're down, but you never felt that Georgia Southern was out of that game. That's the thing I remember from that game. You never felt like Georgia Southern was going to get beat by Wake.
I want to say a couple of years before that the Eagles had a good effort against Wake Forest, very similar to the couple times they played at Auburn. I felt like Georgia Southern could have won that game, and it was because Willie Powers was on that team. And Willie and I have talked about that Auburn game. Georgia Southern came back from 29 down in the second half, almost came back to win, but they lost in overtime. But the Wake game, he said, yeah, we should have won that game too. He was playing under CY. But to reflect on that and how that group did that, there were a lot of big wins in that tenure. The Tukey, the Mike, the Ike, the Jake, that whole era, those guys were so much fun to watch, to improve, to grow, to get to know. That one's pretty close to the top of the list, if not at the top of the list, though.
What is and this is going to be a two-part question, which I know you're a huge fan of.
Always.
But what is your first Georgia Southern memory? Both before you're the voice, and then once you became the voice, what's your first Georgia Southern memory?
Okay, my first memory would have been November of 2011 when I was the voice. That was my first year as the voice of the Citadel. Came down to face the number 4 team of the country at that point. I knew that Georgia Southern had started 7-0, and I think it was a couple of weeks after the App loss up in Boone. I think that's how that went. But going back and looking at the scores for years, I always noticed that the Citadel and Georgia Southern typically played really close games. Just about every year, Georgia Southern was the better team. And that's going to be the case for the Citadel most times. They have a very specific way they've got to recruit because it's military-based. But the games were typically close. Both teams were flexbone teams. The Citadel had installed that just a couple of years before when Kevin Higgins went back to the option.
Heck, those games took about, 2 hours?
No, when you had a Southern Conference with the Citadel, Wofford, and Georgia Southern, if they played each other, those games combined were probably 6 hours. You'd get 3 games in 6 hours. I remember a couple of things about that day. It was a really cold, it was a windy day that turned out to really hurt the Citadel down the stretch. But Freedom's flight, I did not know that this was going to happen. This was my first time I was going to see Freedom's flight. He didn't fly that day because it was so windy.
Mm.
And they made an announcement about that because they felt like they had to tell the 18,000 people there that day, Freedom is not going to fly. And, well, Eagle Nation was not very happy about it that day. So that was my first glimpse of Eagle Nation sitting in the visiting booth at Paulson Stadium. The final score was 14-12, and it all happened in the first half. The Citadel had an 18-play touchdown drive in the second quarter, but both their PATs got blocked. And in reality, Georgia Southern probably should have run away with it, but they had 2 turnovers inside the Citadel's 20. One was right at the goal line. I think that's what set up that 18-play drive, but it was 14-12 at half. It was Noah Hickey had the game-winning touchdown. And what I remember also is that Georgia Southern's first touchdown was on their first offensive play because the Citadel sent a corner blitz from the far side, and Jabo hit Darion Robinson for a 60-some yard touchdown. So it was 7-6 because the Citadel went right down and scored, but they had PAT blocked. End of the game, the Citadel's last drive, they set up a 37-yard field goal. The wind picks up. It's on this hash, kicking towards where the FOC is now. So at that point, it was just the scoreboard on the hill. But as the field goal team is setting up, the wind picks up, field goal's online, and then it just does a right turn about halfway. And that was it. Citadel ended up losing that game by 2. The first memory I've got here is, ironically, against the Citadel.
That's right.
In 2015, because that was my first game on the sidelines.
That's right.
I hadn't seen an expanded Paulson with a full crowd. I came down to the homecoming game the year before against Idaho. That was the game that Matt Dobson had the pick 6 on the deflected ball, and I remember how big Idaho's offensive line was and thinking, okay, this is a lot different watching Georgia Southern as an FBS Sunbelt team as opposed to a SoCon team. But that game against the Citadel, being in when it was a full house, like there was 23,000 people that night, just looking around, because I had never been on the field for an atmosphere like that at Paulson, just looking around thinking, good God. It was a sizzle. Ross Alexander had a pick on the first drive on another tip ball. Kevin Ellison made his debut. He didn't play the first 2 games that year. Matt Breida had an 80-some yard touchdown run. Citadel had 5 turnovers. But it's funny to think that my first memory was the same team, but it was just on both sides.
Just a different booth.
Yeah.
Your first road trip,
Idaho.
Was to Idaho the next year or the next week.
Yeah.
And if there was ever a way to get introduced to this crew, you go, because we went out a day early. We went Thursday.
Yeah.
Spent all day Friday. We went over to the Kibbe Dome and got our way into Washington State. And
We watched Terry punt at the Kibbe Dome.
Yeah.
We got to Washington State where we somehow talked our way up to Mike Leach's office.
Which wasn't that difficult, to be honest.
No.
Frank left his card in Mike Leach's door. And I think, didn't Leach actually call him or send him an email or something?
I thought he might have, but I'm not sure.
I think he got in contact with him somehow.
But the track team was practicing at Martin Stadium when we drove in, and this wasn't one where we just parked in the lot and just decided to walk through a gate. No, we drove through the gate and up under the stadium like we were workers.
I don't remember going through a gate. I remember being on a street and then all of a sudden, oh crap, there's the field. I don't remember going through the gate.
Martin Stadium is not one of the bigger stadiums in the Pac-12, but it's an FBS stadium.
Right.
So you wouldn't think that you'd have the ability to do what we did, but by the time we realized where we were under the home stands.
Yeah, I mean, I looked to my left and I'm like, okay, there's a tunnel. Oh, that's the tunnel to the field.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the travel stories we have are interesting. Only our crew would do it. Only our crew would be able to do it.
Then that was our only game at the Kibbe Dome because Georgia Southern and Idaho did not play each other again, and then 2 years later, they were out of the league along with New Mexico State.
Those New Mexico State trips were trips in and of themselves.
Danny Gamboa, Casa de Auto.
Russ made some friends out there with their SID department.
I don't know if I'd call it friends. he made some acquaintances.
We made some friends with their PA announcer out there, you know.
I like that. That was from 2014.
Some fine folks out there in Las Cruces.
Beautiful stadium, though. Beautiful setting.
Yeah, there were times in some of those games where I thought Russ was going out to the Wild Blue Yonder, but from the press box, you overlook the far side stands, and it's just desert and mountains, which is awesome.
Now you're set up right in the Mesilla Valley, and where we only went to Idaho once, got 3 separate trips out to Las Cruces, 14, 16, and then again in 18 during the 10-win season.
That's right.
Because the 18 game was non-conference, but a slot had to be filled, and for some reason, Georgia Southern ends up at a non-conference game going out to Las Cruces for a G5 matchup. But
I don't think that's going to happen again.
Well, had to come back from 14-3 down early because New Mexico State first 2 drives, they cut up Georgia Southern's defense. Yeah. But then Kendall Vildor had an interception. New Mexico State turned it over a couple of times. I think C.J. Wright had a fumble recovery, and that was the game that Logan Wright busted out because Wesley Fields was hurt.
Yep.
And then 5 days later, Fields comes back against App State, and that's another really good story here at Paulson.
Speaking of New Mexico State, we've been to some pretty scenic ballparks. Not ballparks, stadiums. I think of, and this is the only thing you would ever think about with this stadium, but UMass was a really pretty setting.
Yeah, the colors on the tree, yeah. Because we were there in the fall, and then the game didn't go great, but you wouldn't equate what the scenery was like being in Massachusetts.
No, especially not that deep into the season. Yeah. Army was really pretty.
Gosh.
Army was unreal. I wish it was a non-COVID year so we could have done a little bit more, but that was unreal.
The fact that during a pandemic that we could still get on post, I mean, we've talked about this before as well. The year before, Darrell and I took our vacation up to New York City, so we met up with Brett Moore. He gave us the tour of the entire area. You can't say campus because officially it's on post, but you guys getting up and not really getting to see it because we couldn't set up the night before.
Yeah.
Because we needed special permission just to get there early.
Yeah.
So we ended up getting there about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday because it was an early kick. But the cool thing about that is we got to see the sunrise over the hill at Mikey Stadium, which I'll always remember.
Yeah, I'm not a big sunrise person, as you well know, traveling with me.
That's worth it.
But that one was
all
worth
right.
It. Let's go down that rabbit hole for a minute. What's the best road trip that you've been on with us? What's the best stadium that you've been in?
Are we talking just football?
For now.
All right, the best stadium is Ole Miss.
Dang. Took mine.
Look, there are bigger stadiums. There are stadiums that have bigger capacities, more fans, different amenities, what have you. But that Friday night that we set up in Oxford, I have never seen a stadium look that beautiful.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I ever will.
Yeah,
outside of Paulson, of course. I'm talking about a road stadium. It was just because they had just gone back from turf to natural grass, which we were all fans of.
Yeah.
But the way it was set, the way the lights were on, the blues, the red mixing together, it was absolutely gorgeous.
We were one of the few in the stadium because that year we stayed in Memphis.
Yes.
And had to drive into Oxford. So you and Wyatt and I?
Yes.
Yeah, because that was the year Wyatt was with us. So the three of us drove down to Oxford, about an hour drive from Memphis?
Yeah, give or take.
And we got there later, and as we walk in the booth, we were one of the few people in the stadium, and the lights were on. It was dark, but the stadium lights on. They had already painted the field, and it was really, really cool. That was one of my favorite stadiums.
You got another story from that night, too.
I do?
You met a certain head coach that night.
Oh, that's right.
See?
I forgot about that.
It gets jogged a little bit.
Oh, my mind's dying.
Because you had to test the wireless
I went
mic.
down to, and again, we were one of the few people in the stadium, and so their communication staff was great. They said, we'll leave everything unlocked for you. I think they had a basketball game that night.
Yes, because we tried to go over.
Right. And so they were having to work the basketball game, but they said, we'll leave everything unlocked for you, and if you need anything, call us, and we can run over. Great. So I go down, and I'm walking through the bowels of the stadium, which that should be a game show, trying to maneuver your way around certain stadiums, because some of them you get lost in a hurry. Minnesota was that way. You had to just follow the paddles.
NC State's that way.
Yeah. NC State, you're above the cloud. That's a good story, too. But I go down, and I turned 37 different times. I have no idea where I am at this point. And with our wireless stuff, if you're under enough concrete and metal, I couldn't talk to you. Like it wouldn't reach the booth.
Yeah.
And so I'm dead in the water. So I'm maneuvering my way around, and I see somebody. And so I walk up, and I'm half paying attention. And I'm like, what's the best way to get to the field? He goes, oh, just go this way, take a left. And about that time, I realized it was, my mind's dying. The coach at the time. I can see him.
I don't want to take it from you. I want you to get this.
I need help.
Liberty.
Yeah, Liberty. Hugh Freeze. Okay. I knew it was Liberty.
Yes, I know. That's where he was.
I knew he was at Liberty. I couldn't think of his name. Hugh Freeze. And by the time he said, oh, go this way, take a left, and then it clicked on me. I'm like, oh, I just asked the Ole Miss head coach how to get to the field.
That was Hugh Freeze. And you said, because when we finally got back and raged,
right.
I just meant Hugh Freeze. What?
But went down, tested, got back up, and we made it back to Beale Street.
Best road trip's a tough one.
Yeah. Idaho's up there.
Yeah. I'm a little partial to the cabin a couple times in Boone.
Oh, yeah.
Which is always just relaxing and beautiful.
You didn't get to experience the best cabin trip, though. That was our first cabin trip.
I've heard about this.
When you weren't with us yet, Chris Blair, Ryan Chambers were still here. I think Chris Draper made that trip. Gordon Hunter made that trip, and he found out he was not a big fan of a certain fast food restaurant. Did not go well. And he was hurting the next day. But the cabins are up there. It stunk that we couldn't do a cabin this year because it was later in the year, so it was during the peak season. You had to have like a 4-night minimum or something. But cabins are good ones. Auburn was a great trip.
Yeah.
Hunter's Pub, fantastic. We've eaten a lot of good food in some very random places.
Yeah, that's one where I would need the fully laid out schedule. Say, oh, here, because I'm going back and I'm thinking, I'm a little partial to Georgia State in 2016, being one of my favorite trips.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's not because of the game, but
no.
And this is what makes Georgia Southern such a special place. The fact that you can't sing aloud because they're all good shows you, one, the kind of family atmosphere that really does exist here, and just how many people just go everywhere because they want to feel, because they've been a part of so much success and so much fun that everybody just wants to be a part of it. They want to bring their friends. They want to bring their friends. So you keep making the family a little bit bigger.
Yeah, and that, especially like bowl games, because Georgia Southern goes and takes over a city.
Montgomery would be up there. Mobile would be up there.
Yeah, I was about to say Mobile was up there a couple times.
And you'd like to say New Orleans from the La Tech victory, but we were only, I was only there for 20 minutes. I got in there long enough to do the game, and I was out, but even the team only went down the day before because you couldn't have the bowl experience with COVID protocols.
Yeah. That's what Cure Bowl was for me.
Yeah. We got you there, though.
That was a long day.
And then Terry made it rain.
He did.
Terry literally made it rain in the second quarter.
My mom brings up a good point.
Hi, Pat.
She says, "What about your driving trip to Arkansas with Frank and the puppet?"
I see, going out was fine, but
going out was great. We did Facebook Lives about every half hour.
And if Omar Bayless would have been correctly called out of bounds with 9 seconds left, then the drive back wouldn't have been as bad. But that's one that I think there's a part of my brain that just totally vetoes that actually happened.
Yeah, the going out, we had a blast. I mean, there were 5 of us in the van. You, Frank, Russ, Wyatt, and myself. Because Terry came out separate.
Yes. We had Ark or Bust.
And so we had...
And Frank talked about that on the Sportscast.
We had Ark or Bust because Shannon Sykes and a couple others from that group came and painted the van at the coaches show that night before we left. And then it was was it Wednesday or Thursday?
No, we left, the coaches show was Monday, so we left Tuesday for a Wednesday game.
Wednesday game.
We left Tuesday about 6 a.m., got into Memphis around...
Because Frank met us at our place.
I want to say we got there around 5 or 6. We stopped, we got some fast food right before we really got there. That was when we were on the skirts in Memphis, but it took just about all day to get there. We stopped in Sonoya
we had a couple of detours
to see The Walking Dead. We met Charlie the puppet.
Why Frank has a puppet? And he talked to people in the parking lot of gas stations.
We were somewhere in Nowheresville, Alabama, and as people are walking by, Frank is doing his puppet voice and waving the arms and the legs, and everybody that walked by, and it was a good 5 people that walked by us because we parked right in the main area, right near the curb. Everybody that walked by, they had to laugh. They had to laugh at it.
Coming back was not fun.
He was out of bounds.
He was. Absolutely.
But Matt Stoltz and Brad Bobo will say that Wesley Kennedy was out of bounds in 2018.
Probably right. They're probably right, too. But on the way back, because it was an 8 o'clock ESPN Wednesday night kick, we got on the road at midnight?
Ish, yeah.
Got on the road about midnight, and it was 10 hours? 8 hours? 10 hours?
10.
Somewhere in that ballpark.
Somewhere around 10, yeah.
And so Frank started out driving. No, I started driving. Yeah, I started, Frank finished it. I started driving, and I was good because everybody else would take turns sleeping, and somebody else would be awake, and me and Frank solved the world's problems and about nowhere, Arkansas. But once we got to about Douglasville is when the sun started coming up.
I could have sworn that was Carrollton.
At Douglasville, Carrollton,
but
it's all the same
either way,
thing.
we had just gotten into Georgia.
Yeah, we had just gotten into Georgia, and I'm like, okay, we're in Georgia. I've been to Douglasville, Carrollton many times. Douglasville Bulls, go Bulls. But I'd been there many times. I'm like, okay, I don't need a GPS from here. We're good. But right as we got past Douglasville, Carrollton, the sun started coming up. When I saw the sun, I may as well have been one of those ghosts or whatever on some of the scary movies. When the sun comes up, you turn into stone. I may as well have been that.
Like a vampire.
Yeah, because I hit the wall and I was like, Frank, we're pulling over, Frank. Somebody's coming in. Yeah, we made the call to the pin. Frank closed it out. And that was coming back from because we were going to stay Wednesday night and then just get up Thursday and come home, but we didn't know if... Was that Hurricane Matthew?
Yes.
That was when Matthew was coming through.
And I remember because we ran into Stoltz
Yep.
outside of the press box down near where the SUV was parked. He said, you guys are driving back, and we have to because if we don't, we may not get back because that's when the contraflow had started the next morning.
Frank had his letter from the Department of Defense and said that he was a news personality and had the right of way to go, and we were the last car on I-16 going east and getting shots for WJCL from the sunroof of cars zooming past of about 40, 50 Georgia State Patrol officers going past us, and that was the only cars we saw going east. It was very eerie.
And either the next day or... I don't know if it was the next day or the day after, but we ended up doing a Facebook Live from J.I. Clements because the Batter's Eye, which was going to be renovated anyway the next year for the new wall that was going to be put in, going into 2017.
It was about a month away from renovation starting.
But the storm, which we didn't expect it to be as bad as it was, at least this far inland, knocked over the Batter's Eye.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot we did that. See, this is where you start telling one story and it ends up being 7 stories later that you finish.
This is what happened this morning.
Oh, this is what happens on road trips.
It was great. It was great, though.
People want to be like, so what do y'all do on the road? Well,
we try to remember other stories that have happened.
The best part now is we're going through cities we've been through before and be like, you remember when we did that?
Yeah.
Is that the gas station we stopped at with Hank?
Yes. That was South Al in 16.
Yeah, it must have been.
Because I think it was the Yellowhammer gas station.
Yeah.
That's when Alabama's the Yellowhammer state, and then the Hank the turkey is just kind of
just hanging out, and him and Frank became friends. Frank becomes friends with a lot of folks on our travels.
He's very friendly.
Oh man, we could do a podcast, and it would have to be not affiliated with anybody, but stories from the road.
What else do we have from Eagle Nation?
Oh, that's right. We have one more. This one coming in on the secret text line.
Let's take a call.
No, we're not taking a call.
We're not taking calls.
No, we're not doing that. This one is directly for you. And it says, to ask you about losing to Chris Davis in basketball.
Who sent that?
It is from Anonymous.
That is not a road trip.
We didn't say it had to be about a road trip.
You were there, weren't you? This was the 3-on-3 tournament.
Yeah, I was in the stands, and the best part of it was Rob Klaus. They're cheering on his wife, Brandy Klaus, senior women's administrator. And he had tie-dye shorts, a headband, a tank top, and a sign. And was just letting everybody have it.
Our team was me, Jared, and Scott from Strength and Conditioning.
You were on Jared's team? That's right, because you were a last-minute trade.
Yes, I was supposed to be on Terry's team.
Yeah, you were trade bait.
But there was an 11th-hour deal that happened. I ended up having to switch jerseys at the very end. It was very dramatic. And we played, it was Davis, Ben Rodriguez, and Nick Skull.
That was the first game, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. Played to 5, and it just so happened that Davis, I was in good defensive position. I had low hips, I put my hand up, but Davis has a reputation of being a gunner from deep. He's a very good shooter, and he made the 3 from the right wing, and that's what knocked us out.
Wait, so he made a 3 on you?
Well, contrary to popular belief, I'm not going to block a whole lot of shots, so that's why
but neither is Davis.
But I don't jump when a whole lot of people shoot because I know I'm just going to look silly. So I just made sure to get as close, no foul, hand up. He made the shot.
All right.
My shot in that game did not go in.
You had one shot.
I only took one shot.
Was Davis on you?
Nobody was on me, but I blew it.
Yikes.
It was way off.
Was it a 3?
Yeah.
You're more of a free throw guy.
Oh, I can shoot some free throws now.
That used to be the pregame routine.
Sometimes, yeah, if I needed to clear my head, I'd shoot some free throws. Who'd that come from? Are we keeping it anonymous, or because that doesn't really go into the theme? I mean, it's a story, but it doesn't really go to our road trip.
You know, we didn't really put a whole lot of stipulations on this.
That is a good point.
The question is from Morgan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, he made the shot.
All right.
He made the 3.
He did it.
I think Ben, because it was to 5 with 1s and 2s. Ben made a 2. I can't remember the other. I think all 3 of them might have scored. But
sharing the ball.
I want to say that Jared made our only shot. It wasn't me, and I don't think it was Scott, but it could have been. I thought it was Jared.
Come on, Ship.
But I thought that we would be in position to go longer than just one game. But and that was the team. They won the whole thing. So
Of course they did.
If you can lose to the champions.
You know, the highlight of that though was Rob Klaus heckling Frank Hook, who was the official.
And Frank showed up late too.
Yeah, Frank didn't officiate the first round. We were sitting up in the stands. We were sitting behind Leonard and Terry. And Frank's just sitting on the sideline getting warmed up. Like, Frank, what games are going on? Then he got in, and I don't know that he actually blew his whistle.
I don't know that he really had to.
That's true.
But that been a year already?
Close to it.
I guess so.
Close to it. We should start doing that. Like, everybody draft teams, and over the summer, do like an Olympics. I mean, they had the Battle of the Eagle Stars, but that was more of a singular.
God, that's been 2 years already.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was fun.
Time flies, man.
Especially when you're an Eagle.
Right? I mean, what? This is year 7 for you?
Going into 8.
Going into 8. Good night. Seems like just yesterday you pulled up with your car packed. You honestly couldn't have gotten anything else in your car.
And I have a small car.
Right. But that was a game of Tetris that people would have been proud of.
That was a time where I was moving about every 15 minutes, so I had figured out exactly where to put everything. But fortunately, this going into year 8, I've had to worry about doing that for a while.
Perfect. Well, that'll wrap up this week's edition of Inside Eagle Nation. And it kind of goes back to why we started this podcast in the first place. We always said that this wasn't going to be get on here and talk a bunch of stats and X's and O's, which we have to do some, but not very much. It's more about stories and why things happened and why people did them. Still haven't figured out the why people did them part, but
yeah. When you've got people around this athletic department like Roger, like Miss Helen, like Roger again, but people that are so willing to share of their experiences here, whatever the sport is, that's the kind of impact that Georgia Southern has had on them, but in a way to share them, that's their way of giving back. Because now we have documents of so many things that have happened. Look, there's going to be things that are not going to be told for good reason. But there are so many stories because there's been so many wins. Yeah. There has been so much success. There's been a lot to have pride in. There's been a lot to be happy about across not just the sports that we cover, but across all sports. And for all the coaches, all the players, all the guests that we have had that are just simply willing to pull back the sheets and just say, this is who I am and this is where I've been. They're showing us who they are by not having to give us their bio, even though some of our segments have been beyond the bio. But when you can find a way to share in experiences that are part of our lives and in some way change our lives, that's why we've done this, and we've been able to do it now 190 times.
That's crazy to think. And we've said it many times where getting this started was a couple of years in the making, but having to go through a couple of different people.
And we're coming up on 200, which we'll hit at some point in September.
Wow. At some point,
yeah.
We didn't think we were going to hit 2, let alone 200. We thought this was going to be 1, and then, no, we gave it a shot.
You go into it, you think, okay, we've got some stories. You don't realize how much there is.
Oh, yeah.
The more you do, and of course we've repeated ourselves sometimes, but for somebody that joined us in episode 50, or for somebody that's been listening ever since day one when we launched in August of 2018, so that's coming up on 4 full years now.
And if you've been listening since episode 1, please tell us. We want to hear from you, and you deserve a prize. I don't know what that prize is going to be, but we'll find one.
But we try to tell the stories that make Georgia Southern be the place that we not only believe it is, but we also try to show that it's unlike anywhere else. It's unlike a Louisiana. It's unlike an App State. Look, everybody has their success, everybody has their stories, but nobody truly has it with the tradition embedded in it like Georgia Southern does.
And again, I know this episode was kind of designated for a storytelling hour, but that's not to say that the other episodes can't be. So go ahead, get your stories and questions in. You can either comment on anything on Facebook, tweet us at GS Sports Network, or again, a new email address that you can get your questions, comments, concerns, stories, anything into us, gssnbooth@gmail.com. Again, GSSN, Georgia Southern Sports Network, booth@gmail.com, and we will pick up those stories whenever they come in. Whenever you send in the questions, we will answer them here, may even answer them on Twitter if we're not close to an episode, but we will get you your answer some way, somehow. But that'll wrap up this week's edition of Inside Eagle Nation. Again, a lot of exciting things along the horizon, not only for Inside Eagle Nation, but Georgia Southern athletics as a whole that will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. But next week, we'll have a new edition of Inside Eagle Nation next Monday. But for the voice of the Eagles, Danny Reed, this is Colin Lacy saying so long, everybody.
You've been listening to Inside Eagle Nation, powered by Learfield, the official podcast of Georgia Southern Athletics.